Russia is on the attack, but is Ukraine just luring them into a hopeless trap? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. So, this is a look at the front line in the last 24 hours or so, and there's been several changes. But the most notable that I wanted to really talk about are in the east. Now, we've seen that Russia's, big offensive or whatever in around Olchadatina has fizzled. The only thing we're seeing here is, again, the withdrawal of Ukrainian forces to this defensive reservoir and canal line, which we talked about as a predicted event, not really anything exceptional. And in the last several days, you can see there's been zero progress by Russian forces here. So a indicator pretty clearly that this attack has run out of steam. And Russia threw a lot of their reserves into this and may have even expended reserves that otherwise would have gone to preparing for their larger offensive they're allegedly planning in the northeast, in the forested areas up here near Lyman and Kharkiv. But that doesn't mean Russia has stopped its attack. But as we've talked about, Russia has this bizarre fixation on territory. You might recall 2 years ago, they actually paid Wagner troops based on square meters or square kilometers of territory seized. So there was no difference to the Russian military between empty farmland of no value and a downtown urban area. And it seems like Russia might still be operating under this mentality. Because you can see that there has been a lot of push by the Russian military in and around Natalyova and Yasno-Brodanivka. Now, you notice that it's south here of this Umansky line, right, which this was a Ukrainian defensive line that relied on this reservoir and canal system here near Orlivka and Umansky, and had Ukrainian forces dug in the hilltops to the northwest. And it is really effective. You can see that while Russian forces were able to seize the town of Semenivka crossing this reservoir, they're just not able to conduct the kind of open ground assaults necessary to advance their position any further, right? But what they've done, though, is push a little bit south. And when we look south, you see what I'm talking about here. Notice this piece of terrain right here. And it's kind of unique for a couple of reasons. But most notably is that, look, there's a river canal system that culminates in this Vodiana Lake and the Vovcha Lake here in the north, right? And if you thought crossing a river as a military was hard, it is. Crossing a lake as a military is borderline impossible, right? It involves you putting all your troops into boats and having them paddle hopelessly across the water, unable to defend themselves with no cover, no concealment. And in the era of drone warfare, it would be a total nightmare. Like it is not impossible, but it is something that has only been done by like the best militaries against fighting some of the most inept militaries. And you notice here to the north, there's basically the same thing, the river and canal system connecting it with Umansky and this high ground all the way to Orlivka. So this strip of land in between it, you can see is tactically, we'll call it a disadvantage. Yet, that appears to be where Russia is trying to advance. Russia is literally, some of its most dynamic advances in the front line are in this Natalyova region and going towards this Yasno-Brodanivka. And look, where's this going to end for them? Yes, it's true. If you are a member of Combat Vet News, you know that I just dropped a video today looking at the Russian tactics they're using to seize territory in Natalyova. And they are certainly trying their best, but it's a huge slog. And it's pretty clear the Ukrainians don't really have any designs on holding Natalyova. They're just here to inflict casualties on the Russians and pull back. And I think the reason is pretty simple. It's because this whole axis is a complete waste of Russia's time. Why? Well, the answer is simple. That, one, they are not going to be able to achieve anything. Like if Russia, okay, so if you're Ukraine You do not want your forces to be fighting in this little cauldron here, right? You don't want to have to try to hold this peninsula because look, your forces are kind of trapped in a shooting gallery. And they instead are going to want to actually conduct a big crossing operation, blow this bridge, and let the Russians advance. And the Russians seem willing to advance. That's the crazy thing. They're willing to put troops into this thing, a shooting gallery, right? Because look, their forces cannot receive supporting fire from the north, the south, or the west. They'll be trapped here, right? And Ukrainians can easily hold this Umansky line because look, they can't Russia's not going to cross this river here. They aren't going to cross this lake. They have a few hundred meters, and they still have to conduct a canal crossing where Ukrainians are going to be able to tear them apart. And so they're literally getting canalized into this small area where Ukrainians are literally going to have an entire firing line set up to their north and will likely have it set up to their south. That's probably why the Russians are fixated on Natalyova. But you can see that even if they took Natalyova, it still isn't going to change the reality, as you can see here, that any Russian forces that advance as part of this salient are going to be trapped in a firing line where they can't help. Here's the thing. Russian forces that are stuck on this peninsula, they're not going to be able to provide very much support for other Russian forces trying to advance to the north and south. Maybe they can provide some indirect fire support, but you're not going to have a BMP or a BTR like setting up positions here, shooting across the lake. It's just not going to happen, right? The lake is even if they wanted to support, let's say, offensive efforts here, you're talking about a kilometer away. Maybe you could do some area fire with again, maybe a BTR autocannon, but you're not going to get any kind of real meaningful fire support. You're not going to get an assault, right? You're not going to have troops crossing this. So it's a very strange place for Russia to choose to put its offensive efforts. And I think it's a reflection of the fact that, again, Russia doesn't really care so much about where it's seizing territory. It just wants to. They're probably, the Russian military seems to have this mentality of, well, our goal is to liberate all of this area, this whole area. And so we're going to have to take this incredibly unforgiving terrain sooner or later. So we might as well just do it now, which is, I don't know how else to tell you this. This is dumb, right? If you're going to have to do something really hard, this is the real world military version of being a level 10 character and being yo, we're going to have to clear this level 50 dungeon sooner or later. We might as well do it as a level 10. It's no, if you're thinking things through, you're listen, clear the level 50 dungeon once you're a level 100. If you're a Russian commander, you should probably tell your bosses, listen, guys, hold off on this terrible, unforgiving piece of terrain. Let's try to finish this assault near Novoprokopivsk or Skokil or push out from Orlivka into Umansky. Anything else is going to be a better idea and going to set better conditions to conduct this advance than what they're doing now. And the fact that this doesn't really occur to the Russians is itself kind of preposterous. You could see that maybe they're trying to break into this Novoprokopivsk, but again, this seems like it's more part of this sort of stalled Russian breakthrough attempt near Ultralatina. And if you're a member of Combat Vet News, which you should be, it's the best way to support the channel. You know that YouTube has a very low opinion of small military creators, especially someone like me who is sometimes pretty unvarnished with my opinions about U.S. and Ukrainian policy, right? I can support their efforts and acknowledge when they make mistakes. I consider it essential to supporting their efforts. YouTube doesn't always. And sponsors definitely don't. I'm lucky if I get a sponsor or two a month. So I depend on you guys. the fans to enable me to continue to do this. So if you want, become a member, right? Any one of these tiers is going to get you access to the twice weekly video drops where I'd find the uncensored combat footage. The stuff we're looking at is less than 72 hours old, footage coming out of Natalyova. We're seeing both Russian and Ukrainian footage, and we really learned a lot in this video about their tactics. It looks like Russia's evolved its offensive tactics. Is particularly interesting was how they use their BTRs, but I can't even show you any of the footage. YouTube will demonetize me. So if you want, it's on Combat Vet News. Again, and if you want to become a lieutenant or a colonel tier member, you get access to the exclusive room on the Discord. You get the shout outs at the end of videos. Of course, you can opt out if you want to support but don't want to put your name on it. But I appreciate these guys so much. So check us out, combatvetnews.com. Links in the description. It should also appear as a card up there. But the other thing that I think is interesting, and we've seen, Russia's really depending on its BTRs and BMPs, its armored forces. But what's fascinating is almost none of them, apparently, are newly made. They're refurbished old stock. And according to some satellite photos that an open source analyst found, the Russia's pre-war vehicle stores have dropped by about 32%, from about 15,000 vehicles in 2021 down to just 10,000 in May of 2024. Most of what it pulled from stores are multi-purpose fighting vehicles, again, with just 922 MTLBs remaining. The BMD, airborne amphibious tracked vehicles, down to just 244. BTR 50s down to just 52 left that they can track. Right, there's almost no new BTR 60s, 70s, and 80s. Right, and there's probably only about 2,600 remaining. And the depot says that Russia's fielding about 1,000 to 2,000 of its MTLBs in Ukraine. And all this is a sign that the Russian defense industrial base, it's scaled up a lot, right? Russia has really managed to turn on the spigot in terms of its ability to churn out munitions. But it is not building everything from scratch. It's still relying on old stock. It's probably manufacturing parts and to get these up and running. But what I also want to point out is it is strongly possible that of these remaining 60% of vehicles, many of them may have been stripped for parts, right? If you want to, it's very common in militaries when you have 6 vehicles that you can't get them running, you go, okay, let's try to go in and pull parts off of all 6 to get maybe the three in best shape up and running. Instead of having 6 broken vehicles, let's just have 3 really broken vehicles that are stripped of parts and 3 functioning ones. And I'll bet anything that a lot of these vehicles are missing, a lot of these 10,000 are missing some key components that Russia's going to have a hard, not impossible, but a tough time getting back up and running. Really, I strongly think that's true. Because again, that's what these stores are for. They're not necessarily to create new rolling stock. They may literally just be like the military version of a pick-apart. And the fact that Russia is not actually able to replace these vehicles is a sign that that Ukraine's war of attrition, their strategy of attrition, may just be working much better than Russia is indicating, right? Behind the scenes, we know Russia has really struggled with its logistics problems. It feels like it's solving them because its force generation abilities are so great. But again, Russia has lots of people to throw into the war, but do they have lots of stuff to fight it? That is a question that it does not have the same clear answer, unlike Russia's ability to generate manpower or low sophistication things like shoot artillery shells, right? Anyway, guys, that's all I had. A huge thank you to our Colonel tier members. And enjoy today's video. Huge thank you to the Lieutenant tier members. Could not do this without you guys, really. And if you want to become a member, please do. The new video dropped today. So I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.